All right, guys, if you have not yet noticed, the sports card hobby has evolved a ton in the last couple months. And if we're not keeping up with all the changes, we're going to lose a lot of money very quickly. Now, to ensure that we're not only keeping up with the market, but we're also positioning ourselves to be one step ahead of the masses, I'll be going over what changes I've noticed from last year until now and how I'll be adjusting my game plan accordingly. So hopefully it will help you do the same. So with that being said, welcome back. Now let's get to work. First of all, I usually release a monthly recap video going over my card sales, but May was pretty damn lousy. So in a nutshell, I made about $500 of profit on Comp C, selling around 55 cards, and I didn't sell anything on eBay, but I did make a couple $1,000s between affiliate revenue and YouTube advertising, which really bailed me out. But the big topic I wanted to discuss was what happened to the scorching hot sports card market, and is it ever coming back? So first, let's run through all the factors, and then at the end, we'll see if we can make sense of it and piece it together. So for one, sports cards had its coming out party at the perfect time last year, which was the beginning of the quarantine. Everything we saw and heard was serious and scary and negative, and we couldn't even watch sports to escape from harsh reality. So sports cards were new and fun and exciting and something we could easily relate to and then gravitate towards. Now in 2021, sports cards aren't the new thing. There are NFTs and crypto and whatever else people are talking about. And speaking of which, Gary Vee was the guy that reintroduced me to sports cards after a 20-year hiatus. And Gary is arguably the most influential person in the entire hobby. But Gary has also been focused on NFTs over the past few months and has rarely mentioned much about sports cards at all this year. Second of all, until just recently, we were also forced to spend money from our homes. So for those who still had income coming in, they had to spend it on physical goods or maybe things like getting food delivery and other services done. But what was missing were experiences. We couldn't spend much money at all on actual travel or dining or social gatherings, which is something we all crave and we need for our emotional and mental health, especially as weather warms up and we want to go outside. So last year when summer 2020 came, there were a lot of Americans that had planned vacations and weddings and other events that they had to cancel, which directed even more money to the few areas that they could actually spend it on that would provide a sense of relief and enjoyment and fun. And sports cards just happen to be one of those areas. Now, with the restrictions being softened, people can actually satisfy their cravings for experiences. And since more and more people are being vaccinated every single day, many people are feeling safer to go out to the restaurants and the clubs and wherever else. We also had stimulus money being dished out left and right, which helped pour into the hobby. I remember someone commented on one of my videos that stimulus checks don't matter that much because Americans will always find a way to spend money. And my response is that someone that is determined to spend money will succeed at it. But when you give them an extra $1,300, then they have an extra $1,300 that they'll completely spend. And now it's capped at whatever their disposable income is, plus whatever credit they have access to. The grading game was also completely different this time last year. We did have backlogs from PSA building up, but you could still get cards graded for roughly less than $10 or $12 from the top grading company, which is PSA. And when you see any card with a PSA slab selling for more than the total cost of the card and the grade, it's very easy to buy up any and all Hall of Famer or base Prism cards of a star and just submit it. And that's something that will probably never happen again. So we have to be a lot wiser with the raw cards we buy since there's a lot more at stake. And then now we have PSA catching up with their backlog and flooding the market with a lot of these cards, which is revealing the true supply on many of these lower end cards, which is a lot higher than most people thought. There was also a lot of foolish optimism earlier on, which is similar to what we saw lately in crypto, where people just are entering a new market and are blind to the fact that peaks and valleys are normal and healthy. So a lot of people just felt the burn in August when prices hit that insane high and then plummeted within a couple weeks. And then recently the same thing happened earlier in February and into March, where prices ballooned to just ridiculous levels and then came crashing back down. Personally, I feel like that scared a lot of people out of the hobby that were just in for short-term monetary gain. And then for others, it was a wake-up call that they couldn't just follow the trends as it happened. And I think of it like touching a hot stove. You should only need to experience it once to learn your lesson. So people are getting smarter because there's a lot more content available on every platform going over different thoughts and strategies. And there's also a couple major data tools that are piecing together this information in such an advanced way that it's giving people like investors and collectors a lot of insight to emerging trends and opportunities, something we didn't have a year ago. And personally, I only see these advancements of all these tools continuing and becoming a bigger part of people's strategies, especially because some of the basic strategies that we hear of, especially at first, like you go in on a player before a Hall of Fame announcement or you buy off season, stuff like that is becoming very common knowledge. And so I think the room for profit on some of this simple stuff will just dwindle over time. New platforms like StarStock have emerged as well, which is catering to a lot of the day traders and gamblers that don't want to deal with the packing and shipping of the cards, and they like the instant transacting with minimal hassle. And the last major difference I see is the opening up of major card shows around the country. So with all this happening over just the last year, this is how I interpret it. For one, in regards to sports cards having its coming out party, I feel like that is just over with. The novelty of the hobby has passed for us here in North America. It had its moment and it was glorious. However, I see comments all the time from collectors and investors overseas about how they wish they had access to boxes to rip and singles to buy without the insane shipping cost and customs and all that other stuff that takes away from the fun and enjoyment of the hobby. And I fully believe that platforms and manufacturers are working to provide more business to Europe and Asia and Australia. And I wouldn't be surprised if sports cards has a coming out party in other parts of the world in the next year or two. I also mentioned that Gary Vee is someone with incredible pull, both nationally and internationally, and he has been obsessed with NFTs this year. And to me, this is an upside because Gary's first major hustle was sports cards back in the 80s, and I really believe he loves the hobby and will create content on it once again, especially as the national approaches in a couple of months. And along the same lines as Gary Vee, the media quality and quantity around sports cards will only improve. We're seeing better and better YouTube stations and vlog videos all the time. And I know for a fact that there are serious media projects in the works that will help the hobby get in front of more people. And if you don't realize how powerful the media is, it's the exact same reason why people rushed out to Walmart last year to stock up on 6 years worth of toilet paper and recently filled hefty trash bags with gasoline just a couple weeks ago. Moving on to the world opening back up, and this is by far the biggest difference between this year and last. And now we have a lot of awesome ways to spend our time and our money, and hopefully we won't go back to any sort of lockdown ever again. But the big question is, what percentage of people were only interested short term while they were making money and it was new and there weren't any better ways to spend their money? And I wish I knew that answer, but obviously I don't. So what I'll be doing going forward is just tightening my investing strategy, and I'll go over that in a bit. Another huge unknown has been the situation with grading, with the crazy backlogs, as well as the power struggle between the grading companies. And I feel like it's changing every couple of weeks, but as cards come back from PSA, the true pop report on a card will become a lot more apparent, which will help us understand the supply. And I also think that once the companies are fully caught up with their backlogs and back to offering all the services that they will offer, it will be a lot easier to understand the different rankings of the grading companies and how the values compare to each other. I feel like we're getting closer to the point where it's going to be mostly recently ripped product that is submitted to grading companies, since most of the 80s and 90s and 2000s stuff has already been dug up and submitted over the last year. And then even if more of it is found, less of it will be sent for grading if $30 or $40 per card will be the new minimum per card. All right, so overall, we have the honeymoon period being over with, at least here in the US. We have less people receiving bonus checks in the mail. We have other new forms of investing and collecting being introduced to us. We have real experiences available to us for the first time in over a year. And then for some people that haven't vacationed or traveled since May of 2019, they're being able to go out. We have people learning lessons and getting smarter every single day. And then we have a whole bunch of unknowns like emerging platforms and companies and media outlets. So what I believe will happen is that the card market will rebound when travel season ends and we've gotten these long overdue vacations and reunions out of our system, and the weather cools down and we settle into fall after the summer of overcompensation. Now, obviously, I hope I'm right, but even if that's not the case, there's still too much upside for the hobby globally for me to even be concerned. And as far as my strategy goes, I want to continue to buy based on prior sales data, and more specifically, that means paying way under the card's record high sales price, and that's because I never want to assume it will ever hit that price ever again. If this is all the money that will be in the hobby, I want to be okay with it. And honestly, I think weighing the downside even more than the upside of a card has been one of my best strategies to keep myself from getting wrapped up in the hype when cards were climbing week after week, which we saw a couple times over the last year. I also want to make sure I continue focus on buying early, even if it's way earlier than necessary. So when I feel like most people are looking to stock up on that sport or player, I want to at least be a month or two ahead of them. And I also want to focus on PSA and BGS since I had a lot of trouble moving cards from the other grading companies unless it's an absolute steal. So with a lot less ignorance and carelessness in the hobby, the biggest thing I want to do differently is to have a solid understanding on the supply side of a card. And investing in sports cards is purely a game of supply and demand, and the demand side is tough enough to calculate with all the factors at play. But when you're not even sure what the supply of a card is, now you're adding another huge variable into the equation. And for example, the current population of a Zion Williamson Prism PSA 10 base card is well over 17,000, and I can't imagine many of those earlier investors imagine that card reaching 17,000, and we still don't know where it's going to stop. At the same time, the issue I had with these serial numbered cards and rare parallels is not knowing how to determine what a good price to pay for the card would be if the last eBay sale was 6 months ago and the market was in a completely different spot. And just because a card is rare does not mean you can't overpay for it. And for me, this is still a challenge, but it's getting easier to piece together with all these data tools out there that you can compare pop reports and player trajectories against one another in a similar way to how a realtor would put together a fair listing price on a unique property. So the additional criteria I want to add to my strategy is 1, focusing on cards I believe have 80% of their pop reports filled out. 2, cards with enough recent eBay sales so that others can easily determine what a fair price would be. And number 3, cards that have a bit more collectability than just a standard Prism base. So maybe that's a silver or a red cracked ice or another parallel. But ultimately, I want it to be liquid to an investor, but also desirable for a collector, and limited to about maybe 2,000 in existence for that grade, but probably less because I want a chart that's very easy to read, but I also don't want that card to have 50 listings on eBay. I'll also be more content with selling at a smaller profit margin because, you know, last year it was very common to sell cards for 2x or 3x because money was flooding in at an unsustainable rate. And when you combine that with the level of ignorance and foolish optimism, people were just overpaying left and right because they thought it would just continue to go up and up. So now if I can make a 25 to 30% profit on a card after fees, I'll probably pull the trigger unless I have a lot of belief in that player or that specific card. So now that the hobby is maturing, what will you be doing differently this year than last? Let me know in the comments section below. And if you want to see how I find deals based on these principles, take a look at this video and I'll see you over there.